It really seemed like he was going to be the next big thing. Unfortunately for him, that didn't happen. After that Alabama game, it was such a weird and bizarre situation for Trevor Knight in Oklahoma.
One timeout. A first down at the 43. Play action.
For many years, Oklahoma has been widely known as QBU. Although I think Alabama does give them a run for their money, the one argument everybody points to, and you can't fault them, is, oh, well, Oklahoma had back-to-back quarterbacks won the Heisman Trophy. It's a great argument, and regardless of who you think QBU is, whether it's Alabama, Oklahoma, doesn't really amount to a hill of beans because we're not here to talk about that. What we're here to talk about is this guy you're looking at right here. I'm going to assume at least half of you watching this video have no idea who you're looking at. You want to know a fun fact about him? He beat Nick Saban in Alabama in their prime as a freshman. Yeah, that's right, you heard me correctly. And after he did that, there was talks about him winning the Heisman Trophy the following season. The reason he led Oklahoma to a victory over Alabama, and the reason people were so high on him after that game, is for throws like this.
Knight's going to go long down the sideline.
I think we can all agree that's a pretty dang good pass. How about this play? Never going to get talked about ever again outside of this video, but Oklahoma's backed up on their own 1-yard line, and he throws a 10-yard out route in the end zone.
Knight to throw, and he rips.
Like I said, nobody's ever going to talk about this play again, but the accuracy on that pass, it could have been any better. I remember this game like it was yesterday. Trevor Knight was playing out of his mind, and he diced up that Alabama defense. They couldn't stop him. It didn't matter if it was 3rd and 5, 3rd and 10, or 3rd and 20. It seemed like he converted every single one. And maybe the most impressive part about all this, haven't even brought this up, is Alabama was known as a defensive team back then. Speaking of 3rd and 15, how about this throw? When Alabama, it's looking like they're about to regain the momentum, they're about to get a stop, and Trevor Knight drops a bomb.
On the line of scrimmage as well. Knight, long ball on the sideline. Got it!
Oklahoma goes on to win the ball game, and Trevor puts up one of the best stat lines you're ever going to see against Nick Saban. 32 for 44, 348 passing yards with 4 touchdowns and a QBR of 92.9. For those of you who don't know, QBR is based on a scale of 0 to 100, 50 being average. Another thing that didn't get brought up enough back then is he had 0 run support. Oklahoma only had 81 rushing yards that day. I said that day, however, the game was played at night. You get what I'm trying to say. What a way to end your season, and that seemed like it was going to be the start of something special for Trevor Knight in Oklahoma. It really seemed like he was going to be the next big thing. Unfortunately for him, that didn't happen. After that Alabama game, it was such a weird and bizarre situation for Trevor Knight in Oklahoma. Because the next thing you know, you look up, and your starting quarterback isn't Trevor Knight, it's Baker Mayfield, the transfer from Texas Tech. And at the time, nobody thought too much about it because Oklahoma as a team, they just continue to thrive. But although Oklahoma was still doing A-OK, what happened to Trevor Knight? That's the $1,000,000 question. I know I sound like a broken record player. I apologize, but I can't harp on this enough. He beat Nick Saban in Alabama in his prime. And for a guy like that just to completely fall into irrelevancy just like that at the snap of a finger, it was shocking. Or not was shocking, it is shocking. There's many questions people have been asking about this guy even till this day. But however, it all circles back to the one. And I mean the one big question we're going to try to get to the bottom of in today's video. What really happened to Trevor Knight? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hope all of you had a great and fantastic day. If not, hope this video can make it a little bit better. Major shout out to Kirby's Fake Puns for recommending this video. What a username. I got good and bad news. Good news is college football, it starts this month. Bad news is that means the documentaries are coming to an end. Once the season does start up, you know how we like to do things around the channel. We cover news nonstop. Therefore, don't really have time for documentaries, and I say all that to say this. If you have any recommendations for a documentary you'd like to see before the season starts, feel free to leave a comment down below, and who knows, we might make that video. Strap in, buckle up, get you a snack, get you a popcorn, get your favorite meal you like to eat when you watch a video, because trust me, I do the same thing, but alright, Matt, blah, 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 shut the crap up. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Mr. Trevor Knight plays high school football in San Antonio, Texas, where he played for Ronald Reagan High School. Listen to these numbers. As a senior, he had 2,092 passing yards with 27 touchdowns, and on the ground, he had 943 rushing yards with 15 touchdowns. This was good enough to earn him a 4-star ranking, and he had an overall scout grade of 91. As you all know, he committed and signed with Oklahoma, and in his first season in 2012, he redshirted. It wasn't until 2013 when he would start playing. In his first game against Louisiana Monroe, although Oklahoma won 34-0, he wasn't too good. Completed less than 50% of his passes, only had 86 passing yards. He did have 3 touchdowns, but 1 INT. Not exactly what you like to see. You got the win, but it wasn't pretty. In his second career start against West Virginia, similar story. He wasn't good. As a matter of fact, he was bad. 10 for 20, buck 19, 1 touchdown, 2 INTs, QBR of 31.9. Oklahoma did get the win, but the offense, it wasn't clicking. So that is when the head coach decided, you know what, we got to switch up some things, and they started Blake Bell against Tulsa, in which he went off. If you are curious, I know it's not a Blake Bell video, 27 for 37, 413 with 4 touchdowns, 0 INTs. It was a flawless performance. Pretty much for the rest of the season, Bell remained as a starter. Trevor Knight was playing here and there, but it wasn't anything special. Oklahoma had an Oklahoma season where they always finished around the top 10, and this is the same year in which Alabama lost in the Kick 6 to Auburn. Alabama falls to number 3 in the rankings, and they match up with number 11 Oklahoma in the Sugar Bowl. It was one of those games, and I know it's going to come off as me making excuses for Alabama, but everybody knew Bama didn't want to be there. We've seen it before with Alabama with Utah, the year in which Florida beat them in the SEC Championship and Utah beat them in the bowl game. Alabama is notoriously known for if they don't make it to a championship or they don't make it to a playoff, they could care less about some meaningless bowl game. They play for championships. Not to take any credit away from Oklahoma because they played their butts off, but on the flip side for OU, they really wanted to be there and they were highly motivated. It wasn't a defensive slugfest by any stretch of the imagination, but that OU offense, they were hard to stop, pretty much unstoppable that night. Just imagine a quarterback playing the best game of his life, and you could argue and say he was a one-game wonder. 32 for 44, 348, 4 touchdowns, 1 INT, QBR of 92.9. Perfect almost. I could sit up here for the next 5 minutes and tell you how monumental of a win that was for Trevor Knight, but I think you get the point. He didn't play good all year long, and he went out there and just played the game of his life. That's what I'm going to call it. At this point in time, everybody's like, well, wait a minute, hold on. Maybe we were too quick to judge Trevor Knight. Maybe he's turned a new page. Maybe when he was sitting on the bench this year and watching Blake Bell, he was developing slowly behind the scenes. Heading into 2014, it was obvious he was going to be the guy. It's his team. You're probably thinking I'm going to say he just struggled from the start, but in reality, he didn't. In 2014, Knight got off to a good start. 4-0 heading into a matchup with TCU in which TCU won 37-33. And this is where the old Trevor Knight, he reappeared. 14 for 35, abysmal, 300 yards, which is okay, 1 touchdown, 2 INTs. Number 4 Oklahoma loses to 25th ranked TCU, and those numbers you see right here, it's just not going to get the job done. The rest of the season was a struggle. That was the same year in which Baylor crushed him, and I'm pretty sure without looking it up, the quarterback for Baylor back then was Bryce Petty. I could be wrong on that. I don't know if I have the right year, but I think I'm right. Anyways, in the Baylor game, Trevor Knight went 12 for 27, still under 50%. You're seeing a pattern, right? In all these games in which Oklahoma loses, he's not completing half his passes. Had 2 touchdowns, 1 INT, QBR slightly above average. Before we go any farther, it is worth mentioning, and I hope you've noticed, in all these games, Oklahoma's defense is giving up 40 points. I'm not excusing Trevor Knight's interceptions and all of his incompletions and his bad accuracy, but there's more to the story. One thing people don't necessarily take into account is when your defense sucks, like Oklahoma's has really sucked for a very long time now, it puts so much pressure on the quarterback, but more important, I said the quarterback, my apologies. I'm going to say the offense, but more importantly, the quarterback. And when you give up 37 to TCU, 31 to Kansas State, 48 to Baylor, and 38 to Oklahoma State, you're not going to win many of those games. In the bowl game, that's when Oklahoma got embarrassed. Let's just call it for how it is. Clemson millywhopped them 40-6. Trevor Knight had arguably his worst performance of his entire career up until that point. 17 for 37, under 50%, yet again, shocker. 103 passing yards, 0 tutties to 3 INTs, and the lowest QBR I've seen in a while, 7.5. Yikes. That's all I know to say about it. Goes without being said, heading into 2015, there was a lot of question marks. And one of the biggest questions was, is this guy even good anymore? And when I say anymore, it's not like he was good in the first place. It's just the fact he played out of his mind against Alabama. Everybody was still riding the hype train. You take away that Alabama game, it's hard to even argue and state that Trevor Knight was an average college quarterback. The guy wasn't very good. And then there was this whole incident with Katy Perry, which I thought about talking about in this video, but I kind of came to the executive decision. There's no point. If you remember the Katy Perry thing, you know. Getting back on track here, heading into 2015, this is when a new transfer would come in that goes by the name of Baker Mayfield. Ah, yes, good old Mayfield. You know who he is now, but see, back then, nobody knew who this kid was. This goes to show you how good Mayfield was. He shows up on the campus. He's only been there for a couple months, and he beats out Trevor Knight for the job, who's been there for years at this point. And we all know how the Baker Mayfield story goes. He was phenomenal at OU. You don't need me to give you that run through. Oklahoma made it to the CFP that year, in which they lost to #1 ranked Clemson 37-13. Before that playoff run, though, in the midst of the season in December 2015, this is when Trevor Knight, he announced that he's going to be going elsewhere. Which didn't come to a shock to anybody, not even to the slightest, because we knew he was going to leave. There wasn't any point in him staying because his days of being the quarterback of Oklahoma were over. Not too long after he announced he was going to leave, in January, actually January 4th to be specific, in 2016, he announced he's going to be transferring to Texas A&M. And since he graduated, he was eligible to play right then. Believe it or not, he won the starting job at A&M, and although he wasn't anything special for them, he wasn't bad. Won the season opener against a top 25 team, UCLA, in which he barely completed 50% of his passes and had 1 touchdown, 1 INT. Then proceeded to stomp a top 25 Arkansas team by 21 points and beat top 10 Tennessee 45-38 in double OT. I'll show you his numbers in the Tennessee game if you are curious. Trevor Knight still playing the same way, completed right at 50% of his passes. You say what you want about Knight, but he is Mr. Consistent. He's always completing right at 50% of his passes and having a couple touchdowns, a couple INTs. Although he wasn't playing like a Heisman Trophy contender, you look up at A&M 6-0 heading into a matchup with #1 ranked Alabama. I guess you could say Trevor Knight used all of his talent on that one night back in 2014. He used up all of his skills because in this matchup, it didn't go his way. 14 for 31, buck 64, 2 touchdowns, 1 INT. I think those numbers are somewhat deceiving because I went back and watched some of these highlights in the game footage. He didn't play bad. A&M did lose, and the rest of the season for Knight wasn't so good. A&M would struggle, drop some games, and in his final collegiate game against Kansas State, in which they lost, he went 30 for 48, 300 yards with 3 touchdowns to 1 INT. He did suffer an injury that year at A&M, but he only wound up missing a few games. Since that was his last year, obviously he has to declare for the NFL draft or go get a normal job. He did receive an invitation to the NFL Combine, and listen to this. He finished first amongst all quarterbacks in the vertical jump and broad jump, and his 40-yard dash time was 4.54. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that is moving. That 4.54 40-yard dash was faster than Alvin Kamara's. Unfortunately, he was quite abysmal and awful in the passing drills. Super inaccurate, and overall, I'm really sugarcoating this, it wasn't pretty. But come on, man, are you shocked? I showed you the stats from all of his games at Oklahoma and Texas A&M. He barely completed 50% of his passes. Let me put it to you like this. He was so bad at passing, he had teams come up to him and say, hey, have you ever considered switching positions? Granted, half of the reasoning for that is because of how athletic and gifted he was, but another reason is because he wasn't performing well at the quarterback position. And maybe if he would have put his ego and pride aside, he could have made it in the NFL as, I don't know, a safety or something like that. Who knows? It could have been any position. Wide receiver, you never know. But he told him, nope, I'm not switching. I'm playing quarterback. What I'm about to say next shouldn't shock you to the slightest. He went undrafted. That's normally what happens when you perform poorly in the NFL Combine. There is some good news. The Arizona Cardinals signed him as an undrafted free agent to a 3-year, $1.66 million contract. I said 1.66. That sounds stupid, Matt. You sound illiterate. I should have just said 1.66. This good news was short-lived because in September of 2017, so right as the season was starting, he didn't even make the final roster. The Atlanta Falcons did sign to a practice squad and nothing came out of that. Eventually, he would join the AAF, which is the Arena Football League. He only played 2 games with them because that league, it wound up ceasing operations. Fast forward in time, as to where it stands today, he has a podcast and he's a father and has a great family. These past couple of years, he got into coaching, and recently, he was just named the head coach of a high school football team, so congratulations. It's quite obvious this guy's got his head screwed onto his shoulders correctly, so you don't got to worry about him outside of football. He's going to be successful and thrive in whatever he pursues. This is normally the part in the video where I would say, well, why didn't Trevor Knight succeed and what was the detriment to his downfall? But it's quite obvious. We already talked about it. As much as I like to talk, if I can keep things short and simple, that's what I like to do. You can chalk it up to these two things, and you can combine them into one if you want. Number one, he wasn't an accurate passer, which that's kind of a big deal if you want to make it to the NFL and succeed in college. And number two, he was inconsistent. And when I say inconsistent, I'm not talking about his accuracy. I'm talking about from day to day, from game to game. Some games he'd be good or even great, but others he'd be terrible. And it's nothing personal against him. He seems like a great guy, but, you know, it's part of my job. I gotta call things for how it is. Overall, I'm pleased with how this story ended because, sure, he didn't make it to the NFL, but at least according to his Instagram, it seems like his life's going great. There's many more things I could say, but we'll end it off here. To Trevor Knight, if you're somehow, someway seeing this video, my brother, I'm wishing you the best of luck, and I hope you continue to succeed in whatever you want to do. I'm curious. Let me know your thoughts down below, but Roman.